Today we'll be looking at James Abbott McNeill Whistler, a very interesting painter in the history of modern art. Technically an American by birth, he is very international, however. He lived in many different countries, as we will see, but he brings about some of the arguments that are very important in the formation of modern art. A little bit before his time, again, kind of the substance of what's more important when we look at a painting. Is it the material that makes up the painting, the composition, or is it its likeness to reality? And again, we have a lot of artists that are kind of working with this issue at this time and a little bit later, most notably the Impressionist. Not quite an Impressionist, kind of goes by his own way, but he's also famous for many other things. He's very, very famous for being an engraver as well. As we can see from this portrait, he's kind of made himself look a little bit like Rembrandt. He's probably most famous for this, Whistler's Mother or the Artist's Mother, neither of which is the actual title to the painting. And this has been thought of, along with Grant Wood's American Gothic, as being the quintessential American paintings, if you will, the paintings that are most American in most people's minds. And the irony is, of course, that this painting was never painted in America and currently resides in a museum in France and has only on rare occasion made it over to the United States to be seen in shows. This was actually painted while he was in England and ends up in a French museum, the d'Orsay Museum, along with a lot of Impressionist work that was done during this time period. We will revisit this painting as we progress through his biography, and of course the other interesting thing about this is if you really look at his work, most of it is very, very far removed from what we think of as Whistler's mother. So, born in 1834 in Lowell, Massachusetts, but early on, as you can see, 1842, his family moves to Russia. His father was actually hired as an engineer for Nicholas I to build a railroad between St. Petersburg and Moscow. In 1847, he goes to stay in London, and his father dies in the cholera epidemic that swept through St. Petersburg at the time. I guess Whistler was lucky that he wasn't there as well. In 1851, they, of course, returned to America, and in 1851, he's accepted to the West Point Academy. Does not do very well and is eventually kicked out, so to speak. Works as a draftman for the U.S. military, transfers to the Etching division after he doesn't do very well drawing, or I should say he doesn't do very well in terms of showing up to work. But he learns skills in etching, eventually moves to Baltimore, and it's this early training that will really kind of pay off later. We can see from these early works that we have done around 1850, he was very good at what he did even from a very early age, and this was remarked even very early on. When he was, in St. Petersburg, he drew as a child, and when he went to London, he had relatives that kind of encouraged him along the way too. So very early on, Whistler knew that he was going to be an artist and enjoyed that kind of aspect of life too, being the artist and the artistic aspects of society. He very much leaned on his artistic talent, his natural drafting talent, as you can see very well, the precision that we see on the left. And as I mentioned, he does have a formal education in etching and engraving through the military. He worked as a draftsman drawing the U.S. coast and got fired from that position, so to speak. But he did spend a little bit, around 2 months or so, learning the engraving art. In 1855, he moves to Paris, and this is not a photo from 1855. This is from much later, but this is his Paris studio, and he really does go to around 1855, living in Paris. He's living a very bohemian lifestyle. I think he's enjoying the lifestyle of being an artist as much as the actual making of the art aspect of it. So he spends several years doing this. Around 1858, he travels a little bit around Northern Europe. He also meets some of the very famous artists of the day, Courbet, Manet, the whole circle of what you would think of as realist painters working in Paris at that time, or in and around Paris. And in around 1858, he decides to move to London to test the market out over there perhaps the market was a little bit too saturated in Paris. So in around 1859, this is what we have. This is the first piece we have accepted to the Royal Academy of England. And the Royal Academy is functioning in England in very much the same way you have the Salon functioning within Paris, where you have people show up and they give their work, and if it's accepted to the Salon, in this case the Royal Academy, it's put on display. Most of the public, that would be art goers, will come and see it, and this is what galvanizes your reputation. As you can see here, this is a portrait of the artist's niece and his mother at the piano. Having two paintings in the background is a pretty simple device we have. Again, for kind of showing the opulence of the people, if nothing else. This type of work would, of course, be seen as a vehicle to secure portrait work and that type of work, if you will. And again, doing portraiture work, Old Mother Gerard, if you will, from 1859 was also accepted to this the Royal Academy, from my understanding. Again, when you look at this, this is the type of portraiture work he's also doing at the time. This is very much affected by the French artist Gustave Courbet, this sense of realism, if you will, where he's showing the nitty-gritty aspects of society within the individuals. The skin almost has this leathery type of quality, and the wrinkles within it. And the man smoking a pipe from 1859, the grayish hue of the background almost blends in with his hair, and again you get this over kind of sensation of gray and tiredness from the image. You see an image of two people who have been worn down by life and are older rather than reaching this point in their life without a life of hard work, if you will. So we have the Thames River here, Black Lion Wharf, 1859, brown and silver, old Battersea Bridge from 1859 as well. And this will be a lot of what we'll see Whistler painting while he's in England. Again, I mentioned this before. He picked up the skill of engraving and also etching along the way while he was in the military, or after his post-career in the military. And even though he did this for a very, very short amount of time, he must have been only about 2 months. He must have been really paying attention when he was there for those 2 months, because he really is a master class draftsman. When you look at things like this and you look at the lines and the skill he was able to develop, it really is amazing. And again, a lot of this modern aspects of the river in both images, in the modern industrial facilities that are starting to appear. Again, when we look at two images here from I think around this time period, both the one on the right is absolutely extraordinary. If you look at the use of darkness, one has to remember this is a metal plate, and if this is truly an etching, then the process is that you're using acid in order to cut in, and the darker areas are where the acid is cut in the most. So again, this takes a tremendous amount of technical skill to master, and the name that we usually hear in this conversation is Rembrandt. That in fact, Whistler, in his work in this media, there is only one other person who is as good, and that would be Rembrandt from several decades ago, of course. But again, we see the harbor having a very large influence over his work. This is something that continues. Again, very early on, he was drafting the coast. So we return to the same music room in the Harmony in Green and Rose, the music room from 1861. We can see the young niece is actually in both of the images there. So we have her sitting in a chair with a book open. That could very well be her mother as well, standing there, and it even looks like they haven't even changed their outfits, so to speak. But what we have here is an increasement of the decoration within the room. Whistler's being he's able to show off the fine decoration that he's able to do within his paintings, most notably in the curtains and all of the fine details that he's able to produce within them. Again, this is the type of thing that you would want shown in the Salon, or in the case of England, the Royal Academy, in order to foster sales, to show this type of thing. And again, when we look at his work from this time that he's doing kind of outside of that spectrum, the coast of Brittany from 1861, we see the influence of the Japanese style of print even this early. Again, if you look at the coastal line and the fact that it is so high up in terms of the canvas, this is something that he very much picks up from looking at Japanese prints. The coast of Brittany at this time has kind of a rural religious type of feel. Paul Gauguin very famously will go to this community as well, and really the subject matter of this is the rocks and the line of the rocks, and asleep in the corner we have this tiny person almost succumb to the emotions of the moment there, enjoying a nice nap in what we can imagine is the sun. But to me, it's about the linear work that he's doing within the rocks, how he's actually using line. And if you think about it from the perspective of printmaking, this is something that carries forward. Also, two images from around this time. And again, right around 1862, 1863, he's kind of going in between France and England. But a lot of what we see is this kind of sense of modern construction. Again, on the water, we can see some smokestacks in the right image there at the Battersea Reach. But again, the subject matter is the sea and the thickness of the water on the left over there, this grayness of the hue. Again, we need to remember that these riverways were also used as their major source of sewage, so they weren't always in the most pristine conditions and weren't always the most wonderful thing to behold or smell, I would imagine. But it's the modern construction that really is the subject matter of this as much as anything else when we look at the cityscapes that he is creating during this time. Symphony in White number 10, The White Girl, is actually a portrait of Joanna Heffernan from 1862. Joanna would be Whistler's lover and also model from this time. You'll see her reappear in many of his paintings. This was put in kind of a separate room when it was put to the Royal Academy and caused some controversy. And again, this is the beginning of Whistler's problems with the critics and understanding his work. His ideology was that she was a woman who was relaxing, that the model had kind of was done for the day, and instead it was very much interpreted as a different vantage point, that this was this woman that perhaps was on the way to her wedding night, that she was a virgin. And again, if you look at the bare rug on the floor, you can kind of make your own interpretations as well. She's holding a lily in her hand, and she does not have the happiest look on her face. In addition to not being very well accepted there, it was actually put in, when he submitted it in France, it was put in the Salon of Refuse, the very, very famous show in 1863 done by Napoleon III, also showing Gustave Courbet and Edouard Manet's very, very famous Luncheon on the Grass. The painting caused a little bit of controversy in France as well, but really Edouard Manet's painting Luncheon on the Grass was really the painting that kind of stole the show. So this kind of is the beginning of Whistler's problems with critics and again, and just the general public in misunderstanding what his work is about. For him, a lot of what that painting was kind of a symbol of what he could do with just in terms of composition with the paint and also the subject matter.